Welcome back, Tribe. We're back here today with John Kovacs, and we're going to be discussing metaphysics in the martial arts. John, how are you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks for the call.
Now, John, we're going to be talking about the metaphysics in the martial arts, and that's a subject that is very polarizing. People have different views on how that should be, implemented into daily life, society, and whether it even should be part of the martial arts or not. John, let's get started by defining metaphysics for the purpose of our conversation. Can you go ahead and tell the audience what it is that we're going to be talking about tonight?
Well, the world is something beyond the physical. Anybody who's an athlete or someone who can move well can be really good at martial arts. The physical spectrum of what someone can do with their physical prowess. But what about beyond that? What about character development? What about the other side of what martial arts are? In a way, there is more relegated to, which would be the training of the individual and their character. With the advent of a lot of the mixed martial arts and, things along those lines, we see a lot of great athletes and some great matches and so on. But if you eliminate the character development, you can be a thug, you can be a drug user, you can be somebody with less than great character and still be very good at winning matches. But is that really what we're trying to advocate for people, especially if they train in something called martial arts? That's really the question, I think, more than anything.
Now, John, tell us about your background, and just so the audience understands, what paradigm you're coming from. What is your background in academic psychology, in spirituality? Tell us about John Kovacs' view of the world.
Wow, that's a long answer. When I was a kid, I read a book called the Buddhist Catechism, I think it was called, and I was always drawn to more than the ordinary of what was put out there in terms of Catholic school or what most people adhere to as your typical sense of spirituality. And I don't mean that in a denigrating way, but what I mean is different from what you see in the mainland religions that people would practice, like going to church on Sunday. And again, it's not saying it's not good or wonderful, but there was something more to me than just that. And that was a lot of different things I've experimented with, not experimented with, but even researched and studied even as a young kid. And along the way, I've been through all kinds of experiences, both in the yoga world and the Sufi world, Christian mysticism. It's been a pretty wide spectrum of different things that I set out just for the knowledge and the experience. So it covers a pretty broad spectrum. But today, now, as an older person, I'm exploring more of what is my inherent DNA, what is my inherent calling that's more natural for me as an individual. Less of an imposition on someone else on what I'm doing and more of what it means for myself to explore what's more natural. And for me as a European and as someone of a Hungarian background, I look more at the pre-Christian religion that existed in Central and Eastern Europe, more of the Celtic paradigm or the older animistic or shamanistic cultures. And that's more where I'm at today. Not saying that that's where I'll be in 10 years, but that's where I'm at right now.
Now, John, you have formal training in a fairly unique school of psychology. Tell us about your background in psychology.
When I was a young kid, I was influenced initially by people like Alan Watts and Abraham Maslow and so on. And then from there, I discovered Gestalt psychotherapy under Fritz Perls, and I actually sought out formal training in the Gestalt psychotherapy in New York City at the Gestalt psychotherapy for Institute in Training. and I completed their program there at the same time I was completing my master's in psychology in CUNY. Did both at the same time, in addition to a bunch of other certification programs in Tai Chi and yoga and so on. So that was kind of where that orientation came from. And the experience of going away on these retreats, having to do all that training both with others and also on yourself, it's like literally being turned inside out. I mean, that's the best way I can describe that, And even then, it was pretty intense. But that's kind of like one aspect of the formal training, would be the Gestalt psychotherapy in addition to the master's in psychology from CUNY.
Now, John, Gestalt psychotherapy could be a show in and of itself. In the nutshell, how is it unique from mainline psychology?
Well, the word Gestalt, in general, really means to take in the whole or the totality of whom and what you have in front of you. And every time there's an emerging Gestalt or an emerging forefront of what needs to be examined, the other things that are not as important recede in the background. For example, an analogy might be, you're hungry. So you might want to go to the gym, but you have to eat. So you eat, and then you're thirsty, so you drink. It's very Zen in that, when you're thirsty, you drink. When you're hungry, you eat. And those are the emerging paradigms, emerging gestalts that need to be addressed. And then once they're taken care of, they sort of recede into the background, and another emerging gestalt comes up. So it's really all about taking in the totality of the individual. And they have a wonderful method of working with dreams as well, which is various aspects of the person's internal machinations. Some ways it's similar to Jungian psychology, but not quite. There's less symbolism and less mythology and so on, and more of a personal representation of what that aspect of the dream might represent in the moment. So it's kind of less based on interpretation by the therapist and more a resonance with the person that you're working with. You kind of let them figure it out without you trying to impose your own so-called knowledge upon them. So it's kind of unique in a way compared to most other paradigms that you'll see out there. But Fritz Perls is influenced by a lot of things, Jacob Moreno's psychodrama and Zen and other aspects as well. So he built all these things together to come up with what he called the Gestalt psychotherapy, which I thought was rather unique, and still think it's rather unique in comparison to many of the things out there.
So, John, now we have a little bit of background on where you're coming from, some of the influences on your life and your perspective. As a lifelong martial artist, it's very clear that you've identified the need for developing the individual past only the physical skills. You talked a lot about character development. How does John Kovacs go about helping his students develop their character?
Well, if you take out a role of teacher, of guide, of mentor, of someone who's there to advocate for the person that you're working with, then you really need to be present. You really need to be mindful that what you're doing is not necessarily your own need that you're trying to fulfill, whether that's ego or pride or some form of ego identification. Look at me, I've got a lot of students, I'm so cool, or, trying to impose your will upon people and mold them and make them into something that you envision. You really need to be an advocate for the person's betterment on a total level. Whatever it is they're seeking out initially when they first step into a dojo. Well, I just use the word dojo for now, but that could be Kuen, it could be dojo, it could be whatever paradigm someone's operating from in terms of their culture. Could be a gym, if someone wants to call it a gym. But really the initial reason that someone may join the martial arts or a martial art training program may not be the reason that they stay, and may not be the reason that they continue further on down the road. They might have come in for being buried or learning some self-defense skills or something along those lines, which are more along the parameters of someone looking for tricks or self-defense techniques or self-confidence. But really it's more. I mean, it's about relationship building, both with you and that individual and also with them and the greater whole of society as well, how they can be better parents, better people, better students, better spouses, and so forth. You know, it's not about anything other than just being the best you can be, to borrow a popular term. And you're supposed to, as best as you can, I use the word supposed to, purely from a subjective point of view, but in my opinion, you need to be present and mindful and allow that person to develop in a way that's hopefully positive. I've seen too many people in my life as a martial artist who were, glorified thugs in the gi. They might have been great technically, wonderful technically, where they were you just watched them and you're just amazed at how wonderfully executed their techniques are. But, is that really the person you want to invite to dinner around your kids? That's a question of a whole other matter when they're off the floor. Is that somebody you can trust your young daughter with when you're not around? So if the answer is no, even if that person might be wonderful technically, then there's something wrong with that picture. Sometimes the most gifted, athletic, talented individual may not necessarily be the best teacher, simply because their heart and their intention may not be in the right place. So it's something to consider. We see a lot of abuse in the martial art world, sexual and psychological and emotional as well. And that's something that is quite horrible in my opinion. And it happens all too frequently, where you open up a newspaper or go online and you see another, yet again, instructor being accused of some form of sexual misconduct, for example. And that always puts a big damper on other martial artists who are trying to do the right thing and do the right thing by their students and by the people that they're in contact with. So that could be a big problem, and not just in the martial art world, but in the religion, different religions as well. We see that same kind of thing happening. And it always puts a taint on a person's view of that particular paradigm. That's kind of what I'm talking about for development, not to be that way, but to be better than that, if that makes any sense or not.
John, let me ask you, it does make sense, but I have a question for you. As a Christian, that is my true north on my compass. It's something that's, fairly established. Granted, there are interpretations, but, the perspective is very, established. And when discussing something like development or betterment, there's an element of subjectivity there. There are, plenty of examples in the martial arts world of warrior codes, of codes of conduct, from the samurai, the horang. There's, plenty of things like this. And as were for myself, Christianity and, the Ten Commandments, the words of Jesus, that is my code. That's what I try to follow, and that's how I would guide my betterment and, that of my students. How do you deal with the subjectivity of that, that subject of betterment? What is your true north on your compass? Where do you draw firm lines and kind of guide markers as far as the development of the individual?
Well, think about this. If the kingdom of heaven is truly within you, I think it says that in John, then you have to resonate that. You have to walk that. It's that light in your eye. You're not, at that point, when you're acting in a manner of a teacher or a guide or someone who's going to be, because the word sensei, what does that mean? And literally it means one who came before, doesn't it? So if you're going to be the sensei or the one who came before, hence you have more knowledge than that individual who's coming to you for that particular bit of information, you lead by what? You lead by example, right? So anybody can say anything. Anybody can tell me that they're good at anything. It doesn't matter what that paradigm might be, but it's going to be in their actions that really exhibit truly where that person's true intentions lie. Faith without works, right? I mean, in the Bible, it talks quite a bit about it's not just faith, it's not just works, but from what I've understood it to be, it's a combination of both. So, faith without work, right? So you have to have that combination of, well, what are your actions, And people are going to resonate with that. They're not only going to see and hear what you are doing and saying sort of in vivo in the moment, but they're going to look at the whole picture of who you are. Your family life, are you drinking, are you doing drugs, what are you advocating for in your training space? Are you, chain smoking in between classes if you're teaching two different martial arts? I'm not saying that, smoking necessarily horrible, but again, what kind of message are you putting out, if you're doing that, especially if there's kids. I mean, I remember having a teacher who was, we'd have a judo class in the morning, and then we would chain smoke and go crazy and have a couple of Heinekens, and then, we'd have a jiu-jitsu class next, right after that. I mean, what are you telling your kids, who are watching you, especially if you're being really blatant about it? What kind of example is that? So, these are the kind of things I'm talking about. I think every particular religious path is valid if your actions are valid. I don't believe in subscribing to the media hype on one group necessarily being so much better than another. I think there are good and bad in every walk of life in terms of spirituality. I mean, I've had positive and negative experiences with all three of the major monotheistic traditions. And, I've had amazing, wonderful, nurturing, fantastic experiences with groups that are considered cults by other mainstream groups. And yet, my personal experience was phenomenal with those particular people. So, where do you cast your vote? I mean, is one group or one people or one paradigm necessarily so much better than another? And again, a lot of it depends on your behavior. What are you doing to walk the walk? Anybody can say anything. But what are you exhibiting? What are you doing? What's your action? You follow me?
Absolutely, John. Now, John, the title of our talk is Metaphysics in the Martial Arts.
Mm-hmm.
Metaphysics is something that can be studied without ever stepping foot into a gym or hitting a punching bag. Why do you believe that the martial arts serve as a good vehicle for training somebody in these metaphysical concepts and ideas?
Well, okay. When you're young and you're able to do things on a physical level, that's wonderful, because that's the part that you're at. I mean, in my particular view, the paradigm I operate from is warrior, scholar, and mystic, kind of in that order. Because when you're young, you can be the warrior. You can run out and you can, be very physical. And what I mean by warrior is not that you can't be 65 or 70 and be a warrior. That's not what I mean. What I mean by that is in terms of energy, the type of energy that you have. It's a developmental curve. So if you've got the energy to run out and lift weights and fight full contact and do all these things and play a good game of judo and these kind of things, that's wonderful. But can you really compete at that same level when your body can't handle that kind of physical stress anymore, and you get injured and don't heal as quick and so on? So, what comes next then, you have to become the scholar. You start to study what you do and what your passion is on a deeper level. You might be reading, attend workshops, meet with other people, and learn more about the history of your art and so on, and start to pull together, your own view or your own perspective on what you study. And then the mystic is, when you're older and you're reflecting upon your life and, you've got, 1.5 feet in the grave. I mean, what do? You can't go out there and do the same thing physically as you did. So you have to make peace with that aspect of your soul, if you believe in the term soul, as best as you can. And I think that the martial arts, is a wonderful vehicle to sort of work in those gradations into the metaphysical. And what you said before is true. You don't need the martial arts for that. You never would have to step on a dojo floor ever to know what a metaphysical experience or practice is. But certainly, if you look at martial arts from its culture of origination, if you look at Bagua, for example, it's not separate from the I Ching. It's a big piece of what you study because that's an aspect of the art that's part and parcel of the art. You can separate the physical movement of the art, but really it's tied intricately into the I Ching. If you look at other arts, they have a cultural emanation. Whether it's the Indians of the Midwestern plains or the samurai code and ethos of old school Japan. All these things have a cultural and spiritual paradigm that are imbued within the practice of the art. And sometimes you can't separate them. It's all part and parcel of what you're studying. You mentioned that Huarang and all of some of the other cultures before. Well, that's also cultural. It's also very much cultural. Where and how these people trained and what their moral and so forth ethos might be. And again, each of these cultures had their own inherent religions, whether it's Buddhism or Taoism or Confucianism or Zen or Christianity or whatever the case might be. So you really can't separate them. They're all sort of wrapped up into each aspect of what they represent.
John, from the student's perspective, do you feel that it's important for the student to organically develop into an understanding of their spirituality and of the metaphysics, or do you think it has to be laid out for them initially, where you say, hey, little Jimmy, we're going to teach you how to punch and kick, but you're also going to learn this and that, and give them the goal to develop into that spirituality?
Well, that's really kind of the tricky answer, because you don't want to superimpose on someone something that is not for them or they're not ready for. I mean, what does it say when Christ is talking to his disciples when they come to a village and they're not ready to receive the instruction, kick off the dust on the sandals and move on to another place where people are more receptive to what you're offering? Isn't that what it says in the Bible? So you can't go in there with an attitude of superimposing something on a particular individual that they're either not able or not willing to receive. That would be a mistake. You can't do that. That's like going into a situation of, insisting that everybody is a clone of who and what you are. I mean, that's not good either. That becomes more of a cult, doesn't it?
So, John, you are of the opinion that the students should come into this type of training when they're ready. Do you feel that it's something that's counterproductive then for an established tradition to have, a set of guidelines that are clearly laid out and available to the students before they begin that journey? And I'll take, for example, many of the jiu-jitsu schools here in the United States, a lot of them will talk about the Bushido Code, just as an example, and make it very clear that that's one of the things that they are going to aspire to. My children's Taekwondo class that they go to, they have a code, that takes up like one entire wall, and it's a list of, the things that they should be doing, honor your parents, respect others, show kindness. Is it important to at least have an introduction to the concept?
When we're talking something rather broad in interpretation, because having an ethical and moral expected conduct of the student is a good place for them to start to learn about, or what you would call correct behavior. And, you don't want to have a too loose of a situation where the students come in with their street shoes and walk on the dojo floor and, kick their feet up on the wall while they're chatting and all of that. So to have an established set of conduct is important. Whether it's coming from the perspective of an Asian culture or a non-Asian culture. But that's very different from metaphysics. Having an established ethos or sense of courtesy is not the same thing as metaphysics.
Wouldn't you say that it's somewhat necessary as a foundation to be able to grow into that?
Well, of course. You want to teach kids good manners. You want to teach them how to be respectful of their peers and respect each other and have good sportsmanship and not demonstrate any bully-like tendencies towards each other, and to be productive members of society. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, I think that's really important right from the beginning.
Now, John, for the people that have been involved in training that are well into their life, they're not starting out, they're not kids, that come across those, and I think everybody can relate to this, there are certain milestones in your life when you reach that crossroads as far as your development, your personal development. And unfortunately, I see a lot of people that get lost. People that know better, that they know, maybe what is expected of them. They know what they should be aspiring to. They may even have a formal guide or be involved in formal training in some school of spirituality, but they get lost along the way. And some of these people may be aware of it, other people may not be. What, as a teacher, and I do consider you even to be a teacher of teachers, what can you do, what do you recommend, how can people get back on track, so they can, evolve and get to that higher level of understanding and metaphysics?
Well, listen, as adults, all of us at some point have seen someone that, no matter how much you have wishful good intentions for them, that they can't come to that place of reconciliation within themselves. We see it with people who are addicted to various elements, whether it's drugs or alcohol or pornography or so on. A lot of times, you can only get someone to come to a place if and when they're ready to receive that message. It goes back to what I said earlier about even the biblical teachings about people being able to receive the message. I think it was in the Garden of Gethsemane where, Christ's disciples were asking for these, wonderfully sophisticated ideas of what is God, what does it mean to come to the Father, and, they fell asleep in the garden when Christ is saying, stay awake with me while I'm in prayer with my Father, and he goes back and they're asleep. Am I right? So he's asking them, well, you guys are asking me to teach you the more profound aspects of what I can show for you, but yet you can't even stay awake in prayer. So how can I expect you, or how can you expect to come to something that's much more profound than even just being able to stay awake? So this process of that analogy of staying awake is very much within many different spiritual traditions, whether it's Buddhism or any other spiritual paradigm. This notion of what does it mean to be alert. Gurdjieff talked about the idea of an individual being robot-like, an automaton, being awake but sleepwalking, not really being in tune with what's really going on in terms of their lives. So these spiritual traditions are really all about, in more cases than not, fine-tuning us so that we can become more alert, more aware, more in tune with what's truth. Krishnamurti talks about truth and actuality in terms of being able to be awake. And Trivyan Trungpa in Buddhism talked about that concept of authentic presence, which I think is a wonderful term, because how many people can we meet in our lives who are really walking that to thine own self be true aspect of authentic presence? What does that mean? We can ask ourselves that and really never come to a complete understanding of what it means to have authentic presence, or to be really true and honest about that question of, am I living up to my full potential? What am I placed here to do? What does that full potential look like? These are things we can ask people who are a little bit, lost or not meeting their potentiality, and put that out there. What does that mean to be genuine? What does that mean to be real? And what are you willing to do to get to that place or to work towards that? Because remember, real martial arts is not about, how much paper you have to plaster around the wall. How much are you willing to sacrifice on many different levels to get what it is you truly aspire towards? What is that thing? Is it tangible? Is it intangible? What is that? And those are the kind of questions that we need to be asking both ourselves and other people around us, and imploring our students to look at. How do we do that? And the martial arts are a wonderful way to work towards that. If you work in an art world, when you're working one-on-one, in Japanese martial arts, the uke-tori relationship, what is that? It's about polishing the mirror of your soul. If you're an uke, that's a gift that you're giving to Tori, because now what you're doing is you're helping each other grow into your full potential. So to be an uke really is an honorific position. It's not about ego, or like, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to bust this guy's butt when it's my turn. It's not about that. It's really about cooperative effort, so each person can maximize the full potential of that encounter with each other. One person polishing the soul of the other in that notion of relationship, being able to relate to each other in such a way that everybody benefits. It's not about who's better and, who can win. It's all about helping each other, and not having any hard feelings, shaking hands at the end of it and saying, geez, that was great, man, thank you so much, and coming back to do it again. That's how we grow, isn't it?
John, let me ask you now, and you've given some really good thoughts about the person that may be kind of lost on that path. What about the person that's eager? I mean, I'm sorry?
Did you say eager?
Yes. What about the person that's eager? Because I've met a lot of people that want to aspire to be something more. A lot of people will sometimes even, unfortunately, maybe be a little bit deceived and not be fully honest with themselves. They may think they're a lot farther down that road than they are, but they're eager. The desire is there. What tools would you recommend for the individual? What tools would you recommend for other teachers to help the students along? Maybe one or two important, things that you've used in your teaching that can help to bring somebody, farther down the road.
Now, when you say eager, does that mean that their ego is giving them a false sense of who and where they are when you say eager, or just desirous?
No, just the desire, the sincere desire to get farther down that path.
There's nothing wrong with that if it's done in the right way. Desire is a good thing. As long as it's based on something positive and you're working towards something that's going to be a mutual benefit for oneself and others, that could be a good thing. I'm not saying that desire in a harmful way, where, like, you know, you're getting better at the expense of others and being hurtful. But if you have great intensity and great desire, that could be a good thing. You know, you just have to nurture it in such a way that it's productive and not counterproductive.
Now, if the person has that desire, because I've seen this many times where, and I by no means consider myself to be, you know, advanced on this path, but I have seen people that do have a sincere desire, but they lack direction, they lack tools, you know, to get farther. And desire will only take you so far if you don't understand a method of getting from point A to point B. That can become very detrimental even to the most sincere, you know, person that wants to move forward and progress. So give me a tool, mindfulness, meditation, something, you know, that you've experienced to be successful with, you know, with people and helping.
That's kind of a tough question, because no one tool is going to work with everybody. So you can't have a simple answer and say, well, this is it, because it may work for someone and it may not work for someone else. So it's not so simple to say, well, this is what I say, because that makes me put myself in a position of being what I would consider pompous, because then I would act like, well, I've got an answer for that. And I really don't. I mean, my best answer, which I think is really lacking in most aspects of our Western modern culture, is rites of passage. And in some cultures, you have a rites of passage, like in the Jewish culture, you got your bar mitzvah and your bas mitzvah, and you know, in the Christian culture, you have aspects of that as well. But we need to be able to look at certain aspects of what we show and teach as a rites of passage. You know, you've come to this milestone now, you know, and it's acknowledged and it's wonderful, and now we have to move on to a different level of something else, you know. So we have to figure out what those rites of passages look like, you know, and then be able to imbue them so that people around us can benefit from them.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the rites of passage, because I can relate to that. I feel that in my own personal experience in my life, I've gone through a version, you know, like you said, there are many, but I've gone through a rite of passage. And if I can take up a second to explain it, I remember being back in college. I was just out of high school. I think it was maybe my first year in college, and I had been training martial arts since I was a kid, and I kind of thought I knew something. You know, every 20-year-old martial artist thinks he knows everything. And I went to a school. It was really tough school. The teachers were tough. The students were tough. It was a whole different world from what I had come from. And I remember that they, you know, took me to task. They beat the piss out of me for about 6 months. I remember literally being like pulled out of the drywall in the dojo walls because they used to kick the crap out of me so much. And at the end of that time, you know, it was kind of an extended rite of passage, but at the end of that time that I was there, you know, end of a couple months, my fighting ability was, you know, shooting off the chart compared to where I was when I first started. And I realized much, much later in my life that, yeah, they made me a much better physical martial artist, better fighter. But I never had to do any of that stuff, you know. I mean, it wasn't crucial to me. I wasn't going off to win any titles in the ring or do anything like that. But the other lesson that came away from that was just knowing that I could be pushed farther than I ever thought I could be pushed. You know, I had set limits for myself, and this instructor had pushed me way past those limits, and I was still standing, and that helped me to grow as a person. That helped me to understand that I was able to, you know, take risks and do things that I thought maybe I could not do, or that I had doubts about doing, because I was able to do it once before. And once you do it, you know that you can do it, and you're not afraid to try to do it a second, third, fourth time, you know. And with life's challenges, that kind of lesson has always been with me.
Well, you know, I had young lady who was a mom to several children, housewife, always was a housewife, never really went to school like she wanted to, and, you know, she was the wife of the really popular, you know, bass player of the church band, and, you know, she was sketched into a very particular role by her family, her children, her spouse, her church, and she fulfilled that role for quite a long time. And then, you know, she came to me alone as screamo, and she was at a crossroads in her life. She really didn't want to be that beautiful, you know, stuck in the house good mom. You know, she wanted to be something more. She wanted to go back to school. She wanted to travel. She wanted to do a lot of things that she was never able to do because she's fulfilled this role that she was allowing herself to be sketched into. And, yeah, everybody, including the church pastor, they were all against her divorcing her husband because that wasn't the right thing to do. She needs to know, you know, that was her role and, you know, be supportive of her husband and so on, which was that particular church's way of dealing with her. Not that all churches do that, but in that particular one, that's what happened. So I don't want to make a gross statement about that, but that's what happened in that particular church. And one night she came to class a little late, and I said, well, if you're going to stay, you got to fight. She didn't want to fight. You know, I put her on the floor with the sticks, no gear, and I said, you got to fight. She started, you know, basically crying and saying she wanted to leave. I told her if she left, she's not allowed to come back ever. She's done. She has to stay, and I'm not going to treat her any different than anybody else on that floor. Male, female, they're all going to be treated identically. You know, no sympathy and all, you know, you have. No, you came to class, you know, you have to perform as best as you can, just like everybody else. You know, and if not, then you can leave, but don't come back. Because that just tells me, you know, you're in the right place. That may sound a little harsh to some people, but this is what she needed in the moment in terms of tough love, if you follow where I'm going with this. So she did. I had somebody stand behind her with a stick, and I said, if she retreats, you know, you swat her in the backside. She's not going to retreat. The only direction she can move is forward, and she has to fight. And I made her fight more than anybody else that night. And after the tears and after it was all said and done, she had a breakthrough. She realized that she is strong enough to face her husband. She is strong enough to go out there and disagree with the pastor and say, this is my life. I'm going to live it once, and I'm going to do it the way it's right for me, not the way that someone else is going to sketch me into my role, but for me, about me and for me. And she went out with her life. You know, she divorced her husband, who was heavy into the control and heavy into a lot of things with her, and her children looked at her like she was completely evil because everybody sided with the husband because had their mom develop her own personality and become a unique entity individual. I mean, nobody wanted to see that. They were all used to having her in a very particular way. But this is one example of what the martial arts can do for someone who's ready to experience what that is. And she's never looked back. And I still know her as a friend, and she's incredibly happy with her life. She's moved on. Of course, her children are resentful, and her husband is like, how dare she do that to me? But she is immensely happy. And she attributes that, what Marvel would call that mini satori, or that moment of aha awakening, to that moment in the school when she was told, you know, no, you're not going to move backwards. Anywhere you can go is forward, and you will fight. And you will not give up. You will fight. And that's a profound lesson that someone can learn. You know, what that means to fight. Fight for what they believe in. Fight for what's right. Fight for what their own sense of individuation is. You know, the martial arts are a great vehicle for that.
Now, John, one aspect of the spirituality that I want to talk about, it's, you know, I think all of us can appreciate the value. I mean, of course, there are people that will dismiss it and only look at the physical side of the martial arts. But I think, especially with our audience, there's a lot of appreciation for this type of development, this personal development. But one thing, and it's with anything good in life, there's always a dark side to it. I am often put back at what I see as virtually kind of cult-like behavior and misleading teachings, things that are not going to help anybody along the path, but are being done only for the benefit of one or a few selfish individuals. Have you had any experiences with the dark side of this type of training, or the effects that it can cause on people's lives? And what would you tell students to help them avoid those pitfalls?
Well, again, it's like if we can use an analogy of someone being involved in a religion that you and I may look at as a cult. Okay. Can you tell that person who's actively involved in that cult, when they're actively involved in it, that may not necessarily be a good place for them and that they're involved in a cult? Are they ready and able to hear what you have to say? And generally the answer is no. I mean, if they're heavily invested in a particular, circle of people, they're not going to hear what you say, even if what you're saying is true in your own opinion. So you really can't tell somebody something unless they're able and ready to see it for themselves. How many people do we know in the martial art world who have passed away that we know of, that we've seen in our lives, who once they pass away, they suddenly become fault-free and they're suddenly deified? They're like a living saint. That person did no wrong. And meanwhile, we know when they were alive that they were maybe, dealing drugs like cocaine, or maybe they were a sexual predator, or maybe they were a bully, or there was other things that they did in their lives. And suddenly all that's forgotten. It's like, oh man, this guy was, this gal was just phenomenal. And I kind of just shake my head. I'm like, well, that's not the person I remember. I remember somebody very different, and you can deify this individual if you want to, but that's not what I remember. I remember they had their good qualities, but they had their, like you said before, the dark side as well. But nobody wants to hear that because this person can't do any wrong now, especially if they've passed away. God forbid you say something negative about that individual. Oh my God, you're going to be on the receiving end of quite a bit of backlash. Am I right? So you really can't say much, and you really can't tell anybody that, maybe that particular person they're training with is not as, wonderful as they put them on, because, the king is wearing no clothes. That's an old story, isn't it? So sometimes it's really tough to get somebody to hear what you're trying to say in terms of what we believe is good intentions, because they can't hear it. So the student or the person involved with that training has to be able, on some level, at least to hear what you're trying to say. And that's the first step. They can't hear what you're saying and take it as well-meaning good intentions, then there's absolutely no way you're going to get that person not to train with that person. It's just not going to happen.
John, the tribe is very receptive to suggestions as far as training. From your experience in, Eastern spirituality, Western spirituality, clinical psychology, give me a 4 or 5 book summer reading list for the guys. Give me some of the works that are on your close bookshelf that can, maybe inspire some ideas and some direction for the listeners.
I wouldn't even know where to begin on that. I've got like a crazy library. It depends on where people are at and what they're looking for. Certainly, a very popular book when I was much younger was Krishnamurti's book called Think on These Things, which is a nice book to look at. Personality and Motivation by Maslow, if you want to learn a little bit about his methodology, is certainly not a bad way to go. In and Out of the Garbage Pail by Fritz Perls and Gestalt Psychotherapy is a good book. On Alan Watts, you can read something called Zen Effects. It was by Monica Furlong. It's another book. Any book that's spiritually oriented that someone resonates with. If you're into the old Persian Sufi mystics, Hafiz and Rumi and so on. They're wonderful reads. Certainly the Dhammapada in Buddhism, which is like the basic catechism of what Buddhism really is a wonderful thing. The Bible, of course, is an indispensable book, as would be the Quran. From the Buddhist perspective, what I would say Dhammapada, and that would be a good place to start if you want to look at what the older, more original teachings of what the Buddha taught. That's certainly a good place to go. A lot of books by Alan Watts is a good place to start. And again, I'm talking about initial sort of basic jumping off points. Chogyam Trungpa wrote a good book on meditation where he talks about the notion of authentic presence. The books anything by Thich Nhat Hanh is generally very good. Vietnamese Zen monk when it comes to mindfulness training. So, and these are just some ideas. There's plenty of things out there to look at, but these are some ideas. I hope that helps a little bit. And again, anything that deals with good interpretations like Cleary's book on Sun Tzu or Guerrilla Warfare by Mao Zedong, if you want to look at, tactics. These are also some good books to go with in terms of that genre.
Well, thank you for the suggestions, John. John, any parting words for the audience before we wrap up here today?
Just glad to be here, man. Growing and still learning, and I want people to think about the difference between being a human being and something called a human becoming, because there's a difference between that. And a human being is kind of a finished product, something that someone can look at and say, okay, I'm kind of done, but we're not really human beings, are we? We're more human becomings, because hopefully, no matter how long we're on this planet, we're going to continue to learn and evolve and be better than the day before. What I like to do is remind myself of Carl Jung. He was an active student of his particular study up until the day he passed away. From what I understand, on the day he was passing away in bed, he had nothing but books and material around him, and he was kind of saying, I'm not there yet, I'm still learning. I hope to be like that. I hope to be able to still say that, at the end of the day, I'm still learning. I think that's a healthy thing. That's about where I'm at with that. I hope that helps.
Well, thank you, John. I want to just give you a very sincere thanks for coming on and talking with us about some really important subjects.
All right, my friend, my pleasure.
Great. And John, hopefully we'll have you back on soon. I know I got a lot of great feedback from the audience about your talks, so we'll be back with you hopefully real soon.
Okay, my friend. Talk to you later.
Take care, John.